TV and radio. TV and radio is a fantastic channel or channels to be advertising on. A lot of people overlook them these days because we are so enamored with the digital channels, the targeting capabilities, the data. Some of this is not available on your traditional channels, but they are still extremely effective. We have clients we run campaigns for where we see a 20% increase in qualified inquiry and new patient volume just coming from a TV or a radio campaign. You may not be aware that the big pharmaceutical companies buy over 30% of all evening news TV commercials. Why is Big Pharma spending that much money? Those are the most expensive times and programs to be advertising on. Yet Big Pharma year over year consistently buys 30% of all available ad time at those channels and times. Why is Big Pharma doing this? Because it works for them. They have the data. They're very smart with their money. They're making sure that they're getting an ROI, and they know that when they run TV campaigns, they are getting a significant return on that investment. Now, very important to point out here, they are not just running ads to TV. Obviously, individuals, patients cannot buy their own prescription medications, and so they cannot just advertise to the individual consumer or the patient. They have to be running advertising campaigns to providers as well. Your PCPs, your psychiatrists. And so the patient hears about a particular prescription and how it might benefit them. And then they go and they talk to their provider. And the provider says, oh yes, we're aware of that as well. We understand the benefits. We know the side effects. That might be a good fit for you. PCPs, psychiatrists are extremely busy. They are not always talking to their patients in their little 10 to 15 minute windows about every single viable prescription they could be looking at. So Big Pharma figured this out a long time ago, and they started doing multi-layered, sophisticated multi-channel marketing. How do they advertise to PCPs and psychiatrists? They go to conferences, they sponsor papers, they meet with them in person, they have lunch and learns, they advertise on LinkedIn. How do they market to consumers? They have TV campaigns, they have radio campaigns, they run Facebook campaigns, and all of these channels working together get them the ROI that they're looking for. So when we're trying to be strategic leaders, we should be looking at these examples of the really successful companies in our space of healthcare. And Big Pharma is definitely one of those. And they're advertising on all these channels. How are they advertising? Why are they advertising this way? Because it works. So we should be thinking through the same thing. In this, I will be telling you how we got a 20% return for our clients, or why Big Pharma is marketing on these spaces. Now, one thing I want to think about when we're looking at TV is the target market and the target audience. And just using our Big Pharma example, why would Big Pharma choose primetime 7 o'clock nightly news to be doing the majority of their advertisements or their ad buys? And the reason for this is partly about the business model. So I don't know if everyone here is familiar with how Big Pharma works, but they get reimbursed based on the total addressable market. So when they're researching and developing a drug, they set the price points with the FDA, with the government, with regulators around that market. So if you have an exotic disease, often you won't see a lot of research and development there from a big pharmaceutical company. Usually it's the smaller companies that are going after these more rare diseases or problems that they're trying to solve, but they get compensated commensurate for that risk and that research and development cost and the total addressable market. So if there's only, let's say, 15,000 people that suffer from a certain disease on a regular basis, there are drugs out there that have a price tag of $1 million a month. So why do they get such a crazy compensation? Because that's the only way to incentivize anyone to spend the money on research and development to bring this drug to market. And so Big Pharma knows that when they're advertising, even though they're paying a lot of money, they're actually getting compensated regardless. So whether we're marketing for eczema or IBS or cancer or a mental health condition, Big Pharma has their margins built in. And so they're able to afford really high cost, high production value, expensive channels that maybe other health providers are not able to compete in the same space. But their costs are covered either way. So when we're thinking TV, who are we reaching? Are we reaching a specific audience? Big Pharma just wants to reach as many people as possible, because who has IBS? who has cancer, who has a mental health condition, who is struggling with some exotic rare disease, who has eczema. It's a broad swath of the population, and there's no real good way to effectively target those individuals. So Big Pharma says, why don't we target as many people as possible? And so we'll concentrate our spends, and we'll just be focused on the channels that are going to get us in front of the most people. And by doing so, then we're definitely going to get in front of the people we want. And whether our ad is only seen by one potential patient, if it's a rare disease, or 100 potential patients, the marketing cost makes sense, because even though I'm getting reimbursed less for a prescription that serves 100 people, I'm getting 100 patients. If I'm only serving a prescription that reaches one person, well, I'm getting reimbursed at a much higher rate from the insurance companies or from the government for that prescription cost. So for them, it makes a lot of sense. Now, I bring that up because I really want us to be thinking through the economics of budgeting and why it makes sense to advertise on some of these channels. And that's the logic that Big Pharma is using. We can think in the same way. Are we reaching the people that we want to reach at the right cost through these channels? And we'll talk about how we do that. First thing to get into with TV and radio is it's actually a little bit different, right, from what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. You have digital and you have traditional channels. And what does that mean? Why is that important for us? How do we need to think about that as executives? So traditional channels make sense to us. We have two options in terms of targeting. We can target based on time, and we can target based on programming. And that's really all we have available to us. Can we target based on geography? Only in the sense of what media outlets or news stations or providers we are partnering with. So if a provider covers a metropolitan area in Nashville, then we want to partner with the channels that are in that area. So is it ABC? Is it NBC? Is it a particular media outlet that covers that market? Those are going to determine the geography that we're able to market. And we're just going to reach everyone in those markets on traditional channels. Who are we targeting from a radio standpoint? It's the same thing. It's program-based and it's time-based. So maybe I want to target individuals who are driving to work, who listen to rock music in the mornings. And I know that that's a good target market for me. Or I'm trying to reach individuals who listen to music at work, and they listen to the music at work at lunchtime. And that's going to be a specific demographic of people. A pop channel is different from a rock channel, is different from a country channel in terms of the demographics and the interests. So if there's a correlation that I know with our healthcare services or products that meet a certain patient persona, and I strongly suggest you go through the audience training to get a deeper dive into how we think through that, then that's going to determine where I'm advertising my dollars from a traditional standpoint. Now, digital is different. I've got OTT, CTV here. That stands for over the top or connected TV. They're really interchangeable. And those are your digital streaming services. So whether you're advertising on Netflix or Hulu or Paramount Plus or all of them, that's your digital TV. And then on streaming radio or digital radio, we have our Spotify's, we have your Pandora's. These have different targeting options that are similar to what you would look at for a social media platform. So I can target based on geography, I can target based on interests, I can target based on demographics. Most of the things we can do on a social media platform, we can do on a digital channel for TV or radio. Now, why is that important? Because it allows us to do different kinds of targeting and marketing. So again, with TV traditional and traditional radio, I just have to target based on timing and programming for the most part. With digital, I can say, instead of marketing to everyone who watches the evening news at 7 o'clock, I want to market to women age 18 to 35 who have a pet and own a home. And now our advertisements are going to get in front of every individual that meets that criteria, regardless of what they're watching. So maybe they're watching the evening news, maybe they're watching Game of Thrones, maybe they're watching some fixer-upper DIY program. Doesn't matter. The digital is going to target them based on their profile, their persona, rather than what they're watching. And that can be advantageous. So an example from our own work is we had a client that was running $1 million budget in LA, but their facilities were not in LA proper. They were really around the counties that bordered LA, But the media outlets that allowed us to do marketing on traditional TV in that particular market served all of LA plus the surrounding counties. Well, that was a total waste for us from a marketing standpoint. We didn't want to target everyone in LA. If you're familiar with LA, it's a nightmare to get anywhere. Even if you got to go 10 miles, it can take you an hour. So people are very hyper local in the LA market in terms of the patient populations that they serve. Not an effective spend for us to be reaching all of these people. So we'd be paying a lot of money to reach people who are not going to be potential patients. So in that situation, we took the vast majority of the budget and pushed it toward the digital channels, because those digital channels we could geofence, and we could say we just want to target 10-mile radiuses around all of our facilities in the different counties. And that way we knew that we had a really effective targeted spend in those markets. So that's how we want to think of traditional versus digital. Usually with multimedia outlets, you will have both options. Doesn't really matter if you want to test out both options or put them together, or just have traditional TV or just have digital TV. It's going to be that strategic decision based on your CPMs, because they will charge you different rates for digital versus traditional oftentimes. Thinking about your budgets and the programs that you're able to advertise on. There's also floors. So for a lot of markets, TV is pretty expensive. You often have like a floor of $10,000 a month that you have to spend. But with digital, they might allow you to have a floor of like $1,000 a month. There just aren't the same production costs, and this isn't the same overhead for them to run a digital campaign for you. So they'll allow you to do that. And you could also run your own digital campaign. So like Hulu, Roku, for example, you can actually just go into the back end, iHeartRadio, you can just go into the back end yourself and create these campaigns if you really wanted to, or if you wanted to have your marketing team or marketing partner do those. Or you can partner with the media outlets themselves, and they'll often charge you a fee to run it themselves as well. So different options there. So when we're thinking about what we want to advertise and who we're advertising to, timing's a big one. So if we're advertising early in the morning at 5 a.m., we're probably more likely to be reaching senior citizens than we would if we're targeting 7 p.m. nightly news. 7 p.m. nightly news is going to reach senior citizens, but it's also going to reach people that are getting home from work, who have just finished dinner, or maybe before dinner if they eat later. That gives us a sense. What about during the day? During the day, obviously 50 years ago, this was housewives that were living at home. Nowadays, very different profiles. It could be people that work from home. It could be people on various schedules. And so the demographics and the interest and all that kind of has changed, but we can still target based on that timing to get a sense of if we're getting in front of the right people. And at a very simple level, if we're targeting morning radio, that's going to be our average middle-class workers. And so if that's commercial insurance is kind of the bulk of our business, or who we're trying to reach, that's a great target market for us to be advertising on. If I want to do a news network and we're not targeting senior citizens, I would want to do the 7 or 8 o'clock news for that particular market versus one that's running at 5 a.m. That's not going to be overly advantageous for us. So we're thinking about timing in terms of who is watching and who we're trying to reach based on our audience personas and what works for us. Programming is the other way to do this. So if I'm targeting Better Homes and Gardens or a Fixer Upper show or a daytime soap opera, I have a very different demographic of individuals that are watching those programs. Now, your marketing agency can do research on these and figure it out, but the media outlets themselves, the people that are selling you the ad space, should know this data and just be able to present it to you. So you say, I want to reach women who are 18 to 35, own a home, have a pet. They're going to say, okay, well, you should be targeting these 3 TV programs, because based on our viewer data, this is who we see watching these programs, and that's going to get you in front of the right people. You can also think like Big Pharma does in terms of reach. So I'm targeting like Game of Thrones advertising or Yellowstone advertising or whatever the really popular TV show of the day is. I'm going to pay more to be on that channel because I'm reaching more people and they're more engaged in the content that they're watching. But that might be what I want to do, is I want to reach a wide swath of the population. So if I was a large dental provider, for example, 75% of people on average are going to go to a dentist at some point in the next year. So I'm trying to reach as many people as possible. Whereas if I'm an assisted living care provider, I'm really just trying to reach senior citizens, Maybe I'm trying to reach the families of senior citizens. And so for that reason, I'm going to target Matlock, or I'm going to target Murder, She Wrote. I'm going to target older programming that I know is going to get in front of the right audience who can become our potential patients. So programming is another important strategy to be thinking of as we think through our targeting. Mention here very important news collaborations. So like we have direct relationships with ABC News, Fox News, NBC News, CNN. And since we have relationships with these on a national level, then we can work with our representatives and then get target market specific relationships built with the news stations and the media outlets. This is something that a lot of providers don't know is possible. So can you develop these relationships yourself rather than going through an agency? Yeah, it's totally possible. I mean, the way that we built these relationships, obviously we're spending lots of money. And so they have a preference for working with us versus working with just one individual provider who's just giving them one, contract or set of ad revenue. But those relationships allow us to then partner with the news stations, and we will have on-site interviews at our clients. We will have our clients go and do in-studio interviews. We will partner with the news stations to do website content or to write articles about our clients or articles related to important healthcare issues in the community that then quote our clients. So there can be really collaborative relationships that are built with news outlets on TV stations in particular, but also if there's any kind of radio programming where there's a news element, really, really valuable to explore and think beyond just advertising. Yes, TV and radio has advertising, but how can we make it more beneficial? And we've seen that be extremely beneficial for our clients. We've even had news networks that we've partnered with that have done local events. We've done local town halls on a healthcare issue in collaboration with the media outlet that has been extremely beneficial for our clients. So think a little bit outside the box. Continuing that thought process, are there local media stations or outlets that you can work with? Maybe there's a local radio station for a particular city, or there's a podcaster that's local, or a YouTuber or a TikToker. So we don't always want to think about the traditional channels because there's a lot of value. So we have clients that will work with a local radio station, and the local radio stations are doing play-by-plays for the local high school football game, which has a huge following in some areas of the country. So the CPMs are lower, right? This is a small audience. It's a local station. There's a lot less overhead than a big provider. And so we're able to get pretty low cost advertising, but get in front of our target market for a very reasonable cost during high intent events or high engagement events. So we will get sponsorships during the games. We will get halftime call outs, and then we will actually be the sponsors for the play-by-plays that are on the radio. Podcasts are the same way. Local YouTubers are the same way. There's a lot of advantages to getting with these local, hyper-local kind of media outlets, or it's not even really outlets, sometimes just individuals, but there's a good return from that you should be thinking about in addition to your traditional TV and radio. And the last comment is always thinking through your CPM. So as you think through what's right for us, is it digital? Is it traditional? Is it these non-standard, maybe outside the box or smaller providers? Who are we reaching? How many people? Of all the people that we're reaching, like our total audience size, what percentage of them are likely to be our target market? And then what are we willing to pay to reach those individuals? So as always, reaching more people usually costs more. And that's how a lot of providers will charge, or media outlets will charge. But if only 5% of that total audience is my target market, then I might not want to pay a high rate for that. And so that client that we had in LA is a really good example. They had very high CPMs. It was like a $60 CPM to advertise in those markets because LA is really competitive. There's a lot of advertisers, and so they can charge high rates. While it was completely irrelevant for us to be targeting LA proper, that was just a waste of money. So we don't want to pay those high CPMs to reach a lot of people who are not likely to be patients. So then we're going to have a much more focused targeted spend on digital. That makes sense for us. Now, if they had given us a really large population to reach and said, hey, we're only going to charge you $4 CPMs because we know we're desperate for advertising revenue and we know that this isn't your target market, then that might be worth it. Even though we have a large number of people that aren't going to be potential patients, There's a certain small percentage that are, and a $4 CPM makes sense, right? We're just always doing a cost benefit analysis to understand what channels work or don't work for us. So what are the KPIs? What data am I looking at for efficacy? 100% with radio and TV in general, it's really impression driven. And this is what those agencies will give you when you're asking for information. They're not going to be able to track your calls. They're not going to be able to track, total qualified inquiry lift. Like, you should have back-end tracking to see those things, but the TV station, the radio station, they're not going to have access to that data 90% of the time. Sometimes they'll give you a pixel to add to the website, or you'll do a special tracking number. These things are pretty irrelevant. The tracking numbers, very, very few people call off of TV or radio, right? No one's sitting in their car and then dialing after they hear a radio ad. What we all know happens is that people hear it, and they usually hear it like 5 or 6 times, because by the time they get to work or the time they get home, they've already forgotten the advertisement. They're like, oh, I meant to call, but then they start thinking about something else. And so finally, the 6th or 7th time they hear it, they're like, oh yeah, I remember I wanted to research that particular organization or that service. They get to work, they get home, they pull out their phone, they Google it, and then they're going to do a call. So they're never going to call off of the radio number most of the time. So tracking there is not highly relevant. It's just like if you're running billboards, people aren't going to call off the billboard number. They're going to call off your website once they research it later. Tracking from clicks. When was the last time you clicked on an ad that you saw when you were watching Hulu or Netflix or Disney Plus? Most of the time you're watching those on TV. You're not watching those on your computer or your phone anyway, so it's not clickable. So you're not going to get accurate data from these. It's the reason that they offer that is because so many executives have obsessions around, granular data tracking. That's not strategic. We don't want to be thinking that way, because that data is largely noise on these channels. It's not really giving us strong directionality. So we want to just be thinking about, are we reaching the right people? Do we have a strategic idea of getting in front of the right people for a reasonable cost? And so in that sense, impressions are one of the primary metrics. Now, on top of that, we want frequency. For these channels to work, we need anywhere from 4 to 12 touches a week. So when we're looking at our budgets, we want to say, is this enough? So how big is our audience? How much are we paying? How many people are we going to reach? And how often are we going to reach them in a given week? Because if we're only going to reach them once, like if we're spreading our budget that thin, that is a terrible use of our advertising dollars, because nobody takes action after hearing something once. We just had that radio example. People forget most of the time. The example I gave, this individual had to hear us 6 times before he remembered to actually give us a call or look us up later. So we have to have that frequency component built into our budgeting, built into the flights we're buying in terms of programming and times, and that's going to allow us to have results. So when we think through, are we reaching 100 people? Okay, how do I reach those people 4 times? What is that budget? So frequency is a really important metric to be measuring when we're looking at the success of traditional media channels like TV or like radio. One way to look at the efficacy of your campaigns is that example I just gave you with radio. Think about TV. How does TV work? Again, no one's not calling off of the number on the TV ad, 99% of the time. But what they will do is they're like, oh yeah, you know what? That service sounds interesting, like something I need, like something I might want. And they're going to pull it up on their phone as they're listening to the advertisement. And so you're going to get that branded website traffic, because how are they going to pull it up on their phone? They're going to search for the name of your organization. That's how they find it. That's what sticks in their head. That's what they remember. So really good TV and radio campaigns, you will generally see a brand lift. And so you can look for that in Google Analytics. You can see that in your Google Search Console data, how many people are searching for your website. And if we're seeing that increase, we know that the TV and radio campaigns are working. Then, of course, obviously, our bottom line is always qualified inquiry lift. Are we getting more qualified inquiries? Now, what's really important here to remember is that there is outreach and web inquiries. So when we look at the efficacy of our TV and radio campaigns for clients, we are not just looking at the lift that comes from increased call volume from the web. We are also looking at increased referrals from community providers. Why? Because TV campaigns in particular, but radio campaigns to a certain degree as well, get in front of professional referral sources. So you might have a boots on the ground outreach team and they're going, they're talking to people, but they're only seeing that provider maybe once a month. Whereas if we're running good TV and radio campaigns, we're getting in front of people a couple times a week, which keeps us top of mind. It also builds trust. TV in particular has a certain cachet. It just seems more professional. It seems more sophisticated. People take you more seriously. They see you as a more legitimate provider. So it's one of the values of TV in particular. For that reason, you will see an increase in referral volume coming from your community partners. You'll maybe even see new community partners that you didn't have starting to send you referrals when you're running really good TV and radio campaigns. Now, of course, this can happen on any channel, your LinkedIn campaigns, your ZocDoc campaigns, your WebMD campaigns. All of these can drive increased referral volume. We've just seen TV to be particularly effective for increasing referrals from professional sources. So when you're looking at your ROI and measuring this, you want to make sure that you look at community referrals and increase qualified lift from your website or call volume in general. Right. Tactics for TV. What works, what doesn't, what are we trying to do specifically? Think about this from an advertisement level. This is really similar to what we talk about in terms of ad creation and what good ads are, but you have the hell and then you have the heaven. So if we show them what the pain point is, and you'll see this in really good pharmaceutical ads. Not all pharma ads are good. Some of them are not great, but the good ones will show the pain point first, right? You'll see the eczema ad. They've got the burning on the skin, or they've got the locked up elbow and it's got like metal wrapped around it. And then that breaks off as they use the prescription. And then we show them the heaven. We show them the solution that our service, our product, our prescription provides for individuals throughout the ad. Why do we do that? Because the people that are in pain or have a problem to be solved, that's what they identify with. That's what catches their attention. That's how we pull in the right audience. So our messaging and our imagery attract people that have the problem that we can solve as a healthcare provider. If you do what I call happy frappy imagery, where it's just success stories, or it's just people on beaches, or it's just people, playing tennis out there with pain-free, those images and that messaging only appeals to people who are already in that state of mind, and they can't see the progression. They don't see it as a solution. It's a psychological component that's really important. So we've split tested the heck out of this across different provider types. And we consistently see that when we focus on the pain point, we get better qualified inquiry lift. Now, we might not get better traffic or engagement. And this is where data can confuse providers. So if we run happy frappy imagery, we might get a lot of engagement. We might get a lot of clicks to the website. Where are those coming from? They're coming from happy people that have already found a solution to their problem most of the time. And so they're like, oh yeah, you know what? I used to have that pain and now it's gone and that's great and I love it. And wonder what this provider does, compared to the one that I used. That's not our market, right? Because these are people that don't have the problem that we're solving. And so our engagement data and our traffic data is misleading. It's not actually telling us that we're being successful. Whereas when you run the pain focused campaigns that show the heaven after we show the hell, then you'll see an actual qualified inquiry lift most of the time. So don't ever take anything I say as gospel. You should always split test and see if your particular organization or your market is a little bit different. There is no universals in marketing, but the vast majority of the time for healthcare providers, we've really consistently seen that the hell first works a lot better than just showing positive outcomes. Okay, in terms of obviously you have your before and afters, those are great advertisements to show. Staff is a really important one. Staff advertising is really valuable on TV and radio. So hearing from people just want to know. They want to know who's going to be taking care of them. They want to know if they have particular expertise or if they're compassionate. And so in having your staff and getting to see or hear from the real people at your facilities that are providing your services goes a long way with a lot of potential patients. Related testimonials from previous patients, just showing your Google Ads review score, showing quotes from your Google reviews. Those things can also go a long way. People want to know, can I trust this provider? Have they solved people's problems that were similar to mine? Do these people look like me, right? Is it someone like me that I can relate to and they've solved that problem? Because if they look like me, if they sound like me, then they probably have a similar background or similar problems that I do. And so I'm going to trust a provider that solved the problems for those individuals. Results is a really good thing to be advertising. What are your outcomes? What are your patient success rates? What are your program completion rates? Ideally, this is from a third party. So it's great if you've got internal data. It's even better if you've got a third party that's done the research or that you've called in to do the research, because that's more objective, it's more believable, it builds more trust. Show your outcomes as much as possible. And if you think your outcomes are small, sometimes providers are like, well, the success rate of pancreatic cancer is like 1%. But if you can say, look, our success rate for pancreatic cancer at stage 4 is 2% and the average is 1%, that still shows people that you have a 2 times greater chance working with you of being successful getting their pancreatic cancer treatment than with another provider. So you can do comparative outcomes across industry standards as much as you can do just outcomes in general. So always be thinking how you message it. That's what your marketing agency or your marketing team should be helping you through. Yes, 1% looks terrible. So like when we tell clients that the average click-through rate on a traffic campaign on most social media or paid media platforms is 1%, that sounds terrible. But if we say, look, your average is 0.5% and we generally get 1%, now it makes sense, right? Like, okay, I see how these guys are effective at what they do versus the benchmarks or other competitors. Important with radio and TV is investing in the high-end production. A lot of providers don't have money for TV and radio. This tends to be for bigger providers unless you're in a really small market. You want to be investing the money in high-end production if you're going to be investing in all the money that TV and radio often entails. And so I say this because a lot of times providers don't think through that and say, man, I'm spending $30,000 a month already on a TV campaign. I don't want to drop another $50,000 just to create a really nice commercial, but you should. So when you work with media outlets, when you work with TV stations, radio stations, they will often offer to give you a free commercial. Of course, it's not really free. They're building it into your CPM cost. They're building it into the contract cost. But at the end of the day, they're providing that service. They're generally not very good at it. Doesn't mean that they can't be. We have worked with outlets and stations that have produced really good creative for our clients. But most of the time, we found that we get significantly better results in terms of that qualified inquiry lift when we use really professional production. And that's going to come at a cost. If you find a local firm, you might be able to get away with like $10,000 for an okay TV ad, but normally you're spending north of $25,000 to get a really good TV ad. Highly recommend going that route. That should be built into your budget. You should be really thinking through that. Now, a caveat here, though, is that's a high cost. And we can't split test that. So if I'm paying $25,000 for a commercial, what I don't want to do is spend $50,000 and test 2 commercial variants against each other and see which one does better. How can we do that cost effectively? That's where our digital campaigns come in. So we want to understand imagery, we want to understand messaging, we want to understand pain points. We should have a sense of that if we know our audience well, but we can also get clarity on it or maybe learn something that we didn't know or didn't think of through split testing. And we can do that on YouTube. We can do that on Facebook video ads. We can do that on Instagram video ads, right? All of these video platforms, we can run really low cost. I can run $1,000 a month budget on Facebook or X or LinkedIn, and I can create video content for fairly cheap. I can do a video slideshow. I could do a staff video. We could do word scrolls, word art, all these different options that you have available to at least give you a good, clear sense of what messaging is working, what type of imagery is working. So then as we get that data back for cheap, then we funnel that into the TV production and say, okay, look, these 3 points. We know that targeting women gets a really effective response rate. We know that focusing on the pain first gets a really good response. We've noticed that using this industry term that seems to be a hot trend, like in behavioral health, it might be trauma, or if we're talking about a Gaussian knife, in cancer treatment, these things that might be catching people's eyes. We've seen that be really effective currently. So we're going to build that into our TV campaign. And then we can be a lot more confident that all this money we're spending on production is going to give us the best possible outcome because we've split tested it on the digital channels first. Comment and slogans and jingles. This is what people often think about when they think of TV and radio campaigns. Why are there slogans and jingles? So like I talked about in our marketing overview, the reason for this in the past was because these channels are so expensive. So we were trying to get the as much information as we can into the smallest amount of space. So slogans and jingles allow for that, and this is why you would hear a lot of them on TV and radio commercials in the past. And they're still just as effective in that sense. So it is valuable to have a slogan or a jingle for TV and radio campaigns, but it's not the be all end all. Remember, what's our goal with marketing? We are trying to build trust in a way that drives a desired action. Slogans and jingles might help with that. They're also very memorable. So again, we have that problem where if someone's watching a TV ad, they're actually probably not watching it, right? They are staring at their phone, they're talking to friends and family, they're getting up to go grab a snack from the kitchen. And so they're not overly paying attention to the ad potentially. And so that's another reason a slogan or a jingle can be good, because it's catchy, it sticks in their head, regardless of how much they're paying attention to the ad. And also just a small comment, I mean, think about that with TV. How often do you actually watch the TV ads? You usually perk up if either you catch something from the corner of your eye or you hear something really interesting. So your audio on your TV ads is just as important as the visual and should always be really examined in depth to make sure that it's on point, especially the hook in the beginning, right? How are we calling out to our audience? How are we grabbing their attention? That audio component's really important. So slogans and jingles have value. You should be thinking through them, but they don't have to be on every single ad. Are we building trust? Do we get their attention? Are we convincing individuals to move forward? Yes, then great. Slogans and jingles can be extra in that sense. What is the psychology of this channel? Obviously, as always, on all of our channels, we're trying to grab attention. So that comment that I just made has to be, if we're doing TV in particular, then it has to be auditory as well as visual, really, really important. But how do we get their attention? How do we speak to the right audience? As we've talked about a lot, we want to be making sure that we're getting the right people. Don't really care if everyone sees or listens to our advertisement. We want to know that we're getting the people that we can help or are likely to become patients in the future to be paying attention. So how do we grab their attention? Often there's call outs, right? Very simple questions. Do you have knee pain? Do you wish you were able to play with your grandkids? Are you sick and tired of wearing long sleeve shirts to cover up your skin problems? Right? That's going to catch and grab attention. It's like, oh, this ad is for me. I'm going to pay attention to it. So there's an interest level in terms of how you're grabbing attention, but there's also a focus in the messaging component. Now, once we've got their attention, we have to convince them to use us. Very important here. What we don't want to do is say, hey, do you like coffee? We sell coffee, right? That's a terrible advertisement. Do you have skin problems? We're a dermatologist. Have you ever had an emergency? We provide urgent care. That's the basic level. If you have no competitors in your marketplace, that might work. But you need to differentiate yourself from your competitors in the marketplace. So why is a potential patient going to choose you versus a competitor? And you also want to build trust with them and convince them that you can solve their problem. Just because you provide cancer treatment doesn't make me confident that you're going to be able to solve my cancer. Just because you're a dermatologist doesn't make me confident that you're going to be able to solve my skin problem. Maybe I've been to 5 other dermatologists and no one's been able to do it. So what can you tell me in the space of your advertisement that gives me confidence that you are the right person or provider for me? You got to convince us. Being memorable, going back to your slogans and jingles, very helpful if you just stay top of mind. If something about the commercial, that's why sometimes we use humor. That's sometimes why we use a lot of action. That's sometimes why people will use famous figures, because it's memorable. So we want to make sure that we're always relevant and that we are building trust, but can we do that in a way that really sticks in people's heads? That can have a lot of value in terms of just being effective in our marketing. Collaborations and trust. Always think about your collaborations. How can I partner with other providers in the community? So maybe there's a nonprofit that you serve, that you donate to, that adjacent you support. So if you're a large pediatric provider and you have pediatric offices throughout the city, can you partner with the Boys and Girls Club? Can you partner with Big Brothers Big Sisters? That's a really great collaborative relationship that you can come together and maybe run advertising on, or you're partnering with a radio station around a nonprofit and say, look, we're helping out the Children's Hospital, or we're helping out the Big Boy or Big Brothers Big Sisters. And so we'd like to get the word out And so can we partner in a way that's going to get that out there? And then, of course, we have the news stations that I talked about already. So don't think about just pure advertising on TV and radio. Can you partner with a news network and start doing interviews on site, interviews in the studio, partnerships around creating articles, creating content, articles or content on the website? Really, really important. That's all going to build trust, because those collaborative partnerships allow you to build that relationship, and the trust that they have in the community already is then going to reflect on you. A really simple example of this is oftentimes I'll mention Tony Robbins, right? What does Tony Robbins know about finance? Not a whole lot. But what did he do? He went and he wrote a book, and he talked to all of these people that had a famous financial background, that were known to be good investors or whatever the case may be. And so that their kind of fame and expertise and trust, it's really their trust, rubbed off on him, because then people say, oh, well, he was able to interview these people. So clearly that's an advantage. Like, he must know something. Otherwise, why would they be willing to meet with them? And then two, he probably learned a lot from that, So those advantages can be significant when you're looking at collaborative engagements. Our FAQs on TV and radio. Lots of questions come up on these because they're usually a little bit of a not top of mind for a lot of providers these days, and they're often high cost. And so there's a lot more questions that come with it. What's a good CPM for TV and radio? Really wide range on these. It depends on your market. It depends on the timing. It depends on the channels. And so sometimes you'll see outlets will charge you like a flat CPM. That's not real. They're really taking, if you're doing 7 p.m. prime time advertising, that has a higher CPM than obviously a 3 a.m. commercial. And they might just blend that CPM rate and show you an average. But the reality is that you're getting charged different CPMs for the different times, at least that they're doing that internally. You're going to get charged cheaper in a rural market or a small market than you would in a big market. Depends on the advertisers that they have. If they have a lot of advertising revenue coming in, they're going to charge you higher CPMs, just like the auction-based system on the paid media platforms. If they're struggling for advertising revenue, they're going to be willing to give you a deal. So your CPMs can range anywhere from $5 to $75. We see a really wide range. Again, your digital also usually is a different CPM than your traditional. So just look at your markets and understand from a cost benefit analysis, am I reaching the people I want? Am I willing to pay this price to reach them? And does it make sense to be additive? So most of the time, TV and radio are going to be one of the later channels that we add, just due to the production costs, due to the costs of advertising on these channels, and usually the floors that they have for monthly advertising spends. So we add these on later. We usually start with digital with most healthcare providers, because you can work with smaller budgets, you can get better results, and until you tap out the audience on that particular channel, it usually doesn't make as much sense to expand into TV and radio. It's not always the case. Your target market might be there. It might make a lot of sense. You just have to think through that. But for the most part, start with your digital. What's a healthy budget for these channels? As I just said, depends on the market. You can get radio advertisement going for as little as $2,000 a month sometimes. Digital channels really don't have a floor, especially if you're choosing and running it yourself. So if you're on the back end of Pandora, the back end of Spotify, the back end of Hulu, and you're running your own campaigns, they'll usually let you get away for as little as $10 a day. So you can do really, really low cost advertising if you want to. But if you're getting into traditional radio and TV, then you're starting getting into the $1,000 minimum. TV, a lot of markets are a $10,000 floor. They usually don't want to do less than that. And you also don't want to do less than that. So again, will a media outlet take your money? Yeah, just like Google is going to take your money. But does that mean you're using it effectively? So if I give a TV station, if they're willing to take a $5,000 a month budget, what all that gets me is a frequency of like 1 or 2 a week on the channels I'm advertising on. That's an ineffective use of spend, because we're not getting in front of people with the right frequency to get them to take a desired action, right? I want to get to that 7 to 12 range to really start to be effective. There's a reason you see a McDonald's advertisement, every 2 sets of commercials, or every set of commercials you see the big pharma advertisements. And the reason that they're doing that is because they know that that's the time to reach you, or that they want to reach you. So as I said, big pharma buys 30% of all evening news advertisements. And that might be, they want to get their impression share in then, because they're not advertising during the day, or they're not advertising as much in the morning. So they want to get that repetition, that frequency in within the windows that they're advertising on. Should we lean towards digital or traditional? Usually we suggest a mix of both. There's just different people, different audiences, and then different targeting strategies. I can do more geofencing with digital. We can do more interest-based targeting with digital. I don't have to guess as much, let's say, if I'm reaching my target demographic. So if I'm advertising on a channel that does hunting and fishing, if we're watching Duck Dynasty, obviously that has a certain user profile or viewer profile. But not everyone who I'm trying to reach is going to be watching Duck Dynasty. So it might make more sense to do a digital component in that. So it's all about who you're advertising to and what the CPM is. When should we add these channels into the mix? As I said, for most providers, it's usually later on. It's one of the last channels that they'll add. So larger providers with bigger budgets are much more likely to advertise on TV and radio, especially traditional. If you want to do a little bit of digital advertising, if you think your audience is easier to reach there, go for it. And again, it also depends on the user, the engagement. When you think of how are we going to get people to pay attention to our ads? If someone listens to music, they can't skip it most of the time, right? So if you're doing streaming radio, you're usually doing it when you're working out or you're in the kitchen cooking food. You're not going to walk over to your display, whether you're using Google or Alexa or whatever, and then skip something. You're just going to let it play. So you have a better chance to get your whole ad played on streaming radio than you would if you were running a digital campaign on YouTube. Because YouTube, most people are going to click the skip. They're actually actively watching it. They're using a computer. So you want to think through some of these engagement metrics. If we're watching Yellowstone, you could pay attention to that. The Super Bowl is a great example. The Super Bowl, why do people pay so much money, $1 million for a single advertisement? Well, one, you're reaching a huge number of people. So it makes sense. And your actual CPM cost is not that high to reach that many people. But also you have a high engagement likelihood for a Super Bowl advertisement because people actually want to watch the commercials for the Super Bowl. They actually care about seeing them. So if I'm watching a commercial during Yellowstone, I'm like, I don't want it. I'm just waiting for Yellowstone to come back on. But during the Super Bowl, I might actively watch the advertisements. And so that has a value to advertisers because they get a larger guarantee that the audience is actually going to pay attention to their advertisement. Very important. Should we have the station make our ad? As I said, usually no. It doesn't mean that we haven't had good advertisements made by stations, but most of the time, strongly recommend going with a professional production company and just paying the high cost to get it done that way. You will, the vast majority of the time, get better results with better ads. Makes sense. How do I know it's working? So as we talked about, it's really your qualified inquiry lift. You can look at your brand traffic lift coming from your Google Search Console in particular is very helpful. Are we getting more referrals in addition to just more inquiries in general? And you're generally going to have to wait 3 to 6 months. So for your average display campaign, whether it's Facebook, whether it's TV, whether it's radio, 3 to 6 months is a pretty solid timeline for all these campaigns. My comment here is there's no such thing as a channel that doesn't work if your audience is on that channel. So if your TV campaigns don't work, right? So let's say there was a way for you to determine this, like you just added radio on and nothing else. And so you have all your other channels running, you add radio on, you let it run for 3 months and you do not see any qualified inquiry lift. Why? Because you had something wrong. You had the wrong audience targeting. Maybe you were running at times that weren't effective. Maybe you were running on programs that weren't effective. You had the wrong messaging. The messaging didn't catch people's attention. It didn't stick in their head. It wasn't relevant to them. It didn't convince them. There was no trust built. Something was off. So your campaigns will always work if your audience is on that channel if you do it right. If you do it wrong, it doesn't mean that the channel doesn't work. It means that you do not know how to use that channel effectively to market your services or your products. So always keep that in mind. If something doesn't work, don't write off the channel. Double check that your audience is there. Maybe you made the wrong assumption and for whatever reason your audience doesn't listen to radio. Could be the case. But the reality is that they're probably there. You just probably chose the wrong time, the wrong channel, or you had the wrong ad creative to be effective on that channel. So I strongly recommend TV and radio, especially for larger providers with bigger budgets. If you've maxed out your channel strategy on some of the cheaper or the easier to use channels or the lower cost channels, then adding on TV or radio is a really, really smart play for a lot of providers that have the money to do so. And also, you might be playing in a space that not too many other people are. You can own that channel. You get exclusive access. You think about Facebook, everyone can be on Facebook. We can advertise for $500 a month on Facebook if we want. So we're literally competing with every single competitor that has any kind of marketing spend. But on TV, maybe no other provider has the budget or the sophistication to be able to run on TV. So we get exclusive access to those individuals. Are there going to be individuals or potential patients that are on Facebook and TV? Yes, but we're still getting exclusive access to them on the TV channel. Are there individuals that don't have a Facebook account that just watch TV? Absolutely yes. So again, we're getting exclusive access. So that's one of the values of expanding and diversifying your channel strategy, is sometimes you are able to get in front of individuals that no one else is getting in front of, or you're able to get in front of them more frequently or with more sophisticated advertising than your competitors are able to do. So lots of advantages. So make sure that TV and radio is part of your strategic thinking if you have the budget for it, because it can be highly effective.